So I'd like to call this Wednesday, November 4th, meeting of the Electoral Area Services Committee to order. We have a quorum, so we'll call it to order.
Move adoption of the agenda.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Anybody opposed? All right. On to adoption of previous meeting minutes.
Move adoption.
Second.
Anybody opposed? Any business arising? Okay, on to staff reports. Surge Narrows Wharf license renewal. With the report from the CAO received.
Second.
Okay, just a question to Dave. In reading the actual lease or whatever document that you provided, I am still a bit leery about if we have to move the building. Is that going to be a problem? Renegotiating with transport or post office, sorry.
Well, I think as I and Aniko talked the other day that I think we should wait until we see if we receive funding for the Surge Narrows, as I think Aniko has identified that it's not, let's say, an approved use. If we got funding for the renovation of the store property there. So I think at this point we should renew the lease. If we get the funds for Surge Narrows and get the store constructed in there, I think that maybe be a conversation we have later.
Okay, I'm talking about just at this point, I totally want to renew the lease. I just want to make sure that we are not bound for 5 years to not be able to move it.
Oh, I don't think that's an issue, no.
Okay, as long as that's not an issue, I'm fine with it. Okay, moved and seconded on the report. Any further discussion? Anyone opposed? Carried. Onward to B.
Move B.
Move B.
Committee recommend. Okay, moved and seconded. Any opposition? Okay, that's carried. Okay, so we're on time 2. Preliminary surplus report, electoral area services.
Move receipt.
Seconded.
Mr. Chair, if I may just, Mike will speak to this, but if I may just say a few words, introduction before Mike starts, is that obviously this is a unique year, and with COVID, what we tried to inject in kind of the budget process here is to have a look at projected surplus. I know there's some anxiety amongst local governments about whether they've received fees and taxes and what individual budgets look like. So I've asked Mike to prepare kind of a Q3 surplus report. So heading into the budget, directors can have some idea of what those budgets are looking at. So just kind of a heads up of how we're doing fiscally and what surpluses are looking like. So having said that, I will transfer it over to Mike.
Hi there. Yeah,
Mark,
my comments are much the same as Dave's. We're just applying preliminary surplus estimates in advance of the upcoming budget meetings. We put added commentary in behind all the graphs, which looks at contingencies versus carry forward amounts, as any of the carry forwards will get drawn from the surplus unless there's an offsetting source of funding like a grant or a reserve draw. And as Dave mentioned, 2020 has been a rather unique year, and it's not over yet, but we're going to continue to monitoring the spend as we move through the budget cycle and begin drafting all the service budgets for each function. So let me know if you have any questions on the report, and then there'll also be additional time to discuss this next week during your single participant meetings.
Okay, Are there people that would like to speak to this, to the report itself? I'll have a comment at some point when you're done.
Yes, I would
Anyone?
like to speak. Director Lee. Hello?
Hello?
Yep, we can
Yeah.
hear you.
Yeah. I would
Mhm.
just like to ask through the chair to Mike, so the over $1 million in operating surplus, is that for Area D water?
The surplus for water, I think, was less than that. I can pull it up.
What is the 1 million in surplus all about?
The $1 million surplus?
Yeah,
What page are you looking at?
Yeah, I don't know what you're looking
I'm
at.
not looking at any page. I just made a note on my agenda to ask about it.
Well, I don't think there is $1 million in surplus.
Strathcona Gardens has a relatively larger surplus, but we'll look at that in the at the commission meeting.
Okay,
Is that the one? It's not $1 million, but
Perhaps.
it's quite high.
there's
this-
operating expense total 1.087 million.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah, that's your. I believe that's for. Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure what you're looking for. The expenses out of water is 1.8 million.
1.1 comma 087 comma 270. Operating expense total.
Director Lee, if you wouldn't mind helping us out, what are you
Okay,
looking
I
at?
got it. The surplus from that is 94,000. That was on the second page.
Okay, do you have a
He was
function number?
looking at Electoral Area Administration 130.
Yeah,
Oh, you're looking at E8. That has nothing to do with Area D water.
no, I know. I just asked what the 1 million was all about.
Sorry, I'll just bring up the other report here.
Okay. Mike, she's looking at EA Admin 130, and we have a general expense total of 1.087 against a revenue of 1.1, creating a $94,000 surplus.
Oh, okay.
And Mike, just one more is, so we're in the third quarter. Do we assume that the final quarter will be 5% more than these figures?
Sorry, I should have probably made that more clear. The projection is for the year.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other comments? So if these, I realize these surpluses are now, by the end of the year, whatever the surpluses are, they will be carried over.
If I can just interrupt you. So what Mike has done is tried to, the surpluses that you see here is what he's projecting them to be at the end of the year. So they're not exactly now, he's projected out a little bit. So this is what we're just giving you a heads up into saying this is what year end is looking like.
Okay, so if those surpluses are indeed there, will they be carried forward into next year's budget?
Well, we'll do a number of things. If you look at just, for example, 500 planning, the surplus that we're projecting is almost identical to the surplus we budgeted for. So there wouldn't be much change in the budget. What I've tried to do is provide you something that says, hey, look, if your surplus is significantly more than we anticipated, then we may be able to, reduce some requisition or costs within some budgets. If it's the same, then, we're looking at status quo. Even though we had a COVID year, we've been managing it level water, if you will. And if the surplus is much less than we anticipated, then you might look at that service and say, oh, geez, requisition may go up in that service. So that's what we've just tried to provide a picture for you.
Okay, so using the example you gave, 500 planning, 325,000 plus surplus. if we come into the next budget and decided as a group that we wanted to use 50% of that surplus towards the current year requisition, is that a possibility or not?
It's always a possibility, but just let me identify here on that one specifically. So we budgeted a 333 surplus, and we're projecting a 325, so almost identical. So what we're saying is, if your surpluses drop in a year, you've spent more than you've budgeted. If your surpluses have grown, then you haven't spent as much as you budgeted. So when your surpluses stay the same, it doesn't lead to more or less an increase. So again, you can always choose to do whatever you will, but surpluses are kind of a benchmark for how has spending gone on. If it's level with what we budgeted, spending has been normal.
But what I'm getting at, Dave, is if that money is sitting there as surplus, it's like a reserve, is that correct?
Not really, but when you're budgeting, here's the thing: when you're budgeting a $333,000 surplus, you're budgeting for that. That's not money left over. So again, we're coming in on the budget number for 500 planning. So my narrative to you on that would be, you don't have to expect an increase, and there won't be a decrease. We're hanging tough in that function, which in COVID is good news. So if you look at, for example, let's take 130 EA admin. It's a little bit easier because we budgeted 20,000 and we look like we're coming in at around 95,000. So that is a service there, because the surplus is so much more when we get into budgeting, that you may say, hey, look, we could lower the requisition in this one and not have too much of an issue moving forward.
Okay, well, that's basically my question. I have to ask, why do we budget a surplus other than for the use of, things that just come up, right?
So if we spent all our surplus, let's say you have a $325,000 surplus and 500 planning, and we budgeted to spend all that, I can guarantee you the following year your requisition will go up. But what this report is meant to say is, hey, if you've done better or worse, anticipate that requisitions in some services may have to go up, but in others like EA admin, you might be able to lower it a bit because we've done a good job with our spending.
Okay, I'm sorry to belabor this, but you
That's
say
all right.
our requisition would, if we spent that money, by putting it towards requisition and lowering the requisition. The only way that it would go up is if you budgeted further surplus. Is that correct?
I'm confused. Can you repeat that?
Did you want me to comment, Dave?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. If we're looking at 500 planning here, we came into this year, if you look at the one line there, the 333,393. So we came into this year with a surplus. What we're projecting for this year is for that surplus to grow $7,800. So next year, effectively, you're going to have an additional $7,800 if these projections are accurate of funds. So it's only the year-over-year difference of surplus that really will really impact your budget. But we never budget for a surplus. We always budget. It has to be a net. Does that make sense? But to answer your other question, yes, it will carry, any of the surplus does carry forward, and that gives you options for next year. If we have a carry forward project, that would draw from the amount. For example, if you're $500 underspent in office supplies and you carry that forward, you would need the extra funding in the following year.
Okay, so you would then in fact replace that money through requisition. Is that why Dave is saying that the requisition would go up?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Okay, so if you're saying in that if we had that needed that $500, that we would then have to replace that. Okay, if we have to replace it, the only way we can replace it is through requisition. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, if we needed the additional funds. So for example, like we're carrying forward some of the government grant funds. There's a project that's 100% funded by grant. Because we budgeted for that amount and we didn't spend it, we're carrying forward that expense, but we're also carrying forward the revenues associated, so that wouldn't be a tax impact.
Okay, so.
But yeah, any of the surpluses we do carry forward, it acts as it acts as funding for the following year. So in the 500 planning this year, we had $333,000 of surplus funding. Going forward, we're going to have approximately 325,000, so it's a little bit less.
But that will just stay in surplus. It won't go towards reduction of requisition.
Yeah, it'll stay within the planning. So 130 is a good example because a lot of the traveling and everything was curtailed, so there's a bigger surplus there. There's no underlying project that is needed for. So yes, you could for 130, for example, have some flexibility there. There would be no tax increase because of the larger surplus.
Okay. Any further comment?
I have a question. Well, can't the directors decide if they want to maintain the surplus or return it to the taxpayers if we have over $300,000 surplus? This is COVID. People are struggling. Why wouldn't we lower the requisition?
So
It's a ridiculous requisition, over $1 million being spent on planning for the small staff that we have. I think that we need to look at that one and possibly reduce.
Okay, Director, you're not Director Lee doesn't understand this. So if you have,
I take offense to that. I do understand it. We have a $333,000 surplus, and the directors can decide what to do with that. It doesn't have to remain in surplus beyond this year.
We don't
keep it to next year's budget.
We don't. Okay. We carry it forward we don't remain it in surplus. Anything unspent in the current year goes into next year's budget, and we populate the budget lines with that money, budgeting for a zero surplus. If you spent, so let's just say you had $1 million budget that included $300,000 surplus from the previous year, okay? And you spent, so you requisitioned $700,000. You were using $300,000 for surplus, so it's $1 million. You budgeted $1 million, and you spent $1 million. So then the following year, you would only have $700,000 again in requisition. You would have $1 million in expenses. So therefore, you would have to increase the requisition by $300,000. So if we budgeted to not utilize that $300,000 next year and spent our budget, I can guarantee you the following year that the requisition would go up.
Okay, that I think explains what has been asked over and over. You finally got the nub of it, Dave. Thank you. Because that was the gist of what I was asking, is how could the requisition go up if you're using $300,000 to reduce it? I'm talking about the following year, not the next.
Right.
Correct?
Correct. So, right. Yeah.
So you were unclear on that as well.
So yeah, no, I apologize. So then when we look at our budgeting and your 5-year plan, let's just say that was the direction of the committee that said, hey, look, take that $300,000 in surplus and we're going to lower requisition by the equivalent of $300,000. And then when we spend all that money, I would budget in the following 4 years of the requisition going up. I can assure you of that. So it would be very short term, you're correct.
But, Mr. Chair, it's Director Lee, but doesn't that preclude the prerogative of the directors to reduce the expenses? Like, say we wanted to reduce the expenses so that it wasn't, going to be over $1 million a year. If we could reduce those and reduce the cost to taxpayers in this year of COVID and beyond, that would be ideal. Like, you're not addressing the option of the directors reducing the budget.
Well, you always have, and as Director Lee, as Mike said, coming up next week, if you want to reduce services, then that is your prerogative and that's your opportunity. Reducing costs will be reducing service levels. And if that's what you want, then when it comes to those one-on-ones next week in open session, then you give direction to staff to do that.
Well, the big ticket items are planning. One of them is planning, and there is an opportunity. I don't get to direct what happens in a shared service like that. So it has to be today when all the directors are here that you make some indication that the budget should be reduced.
No, that's not what today is. This is nothing but a for information Q3 report.
Okay. So if there's no other questions, I had a couple for Area C. Function 132, wharves. We have a considerable amount of money budgeted there, and yet we don't have a wharves function. And we have had no movement whatsoever in that file. So I'm wondering why we're budgeting that much money for something that is, yet to be. That's the first question.
Okay, well, either Mike or Aniko can answer that, or I will.
I have a quick interjection. Yeah, the 132 wharves. This is just for the 3 Transport Canada wharves. Just to clarify, so the other 3 are still in parks as of 2020.
Okay, but is it considered a wharves function, or is it just, floating out there because, pun intended? It was my understanding we never actually went to referendum or alternate approval or whatever to establish a wharves function. So how can we put money into a function that doesn't exist?
So, Mr. Chairman, perhaps I can jump in here just for clarification. The what you're seeing is simply a budget, and we were required under the divestiture agreements to account for monies for these wharves independently of all other wharves. And so that's why I believe you're seeing it as a separate budget. It's not a separate service at this point, although that discussion is ongoing, but it's just a separate budget to track these 3 facilities.
Okay, fine, thank you. And the other one is good old 331, Q Cove Sewer. So on this one, back to the surplus discussion, 41,647 is a surplus from last year. I could, for the life of me, figure out how we could have had a surplus from last year when, I was being told continuously that we had absolutely zero money in our budget to do anything. But yet we show up with 41,647 as a projected surplus.
Yeah, coming into this year, we had the additional 22,000, which was just unspent contingencies, everything else. And this year, yeah, it's looking to be about 41,000, and that's we did have that one wastewater treatment plant engineering project carried forward, and then we were under budget a bit on the materials and supplies and everything there you see in the comments. But we are expected to be fully spent for all the future years with the new rate increase.
Okay, so this, what I'm getting at is, could this have been applied to reduce that rate increase?
No, because next year when we move in, like we have a little bit of debt to pay now to add, and everything else, so there would be no excess room. So although we're carrying like the 41,000, really what you're looking at is the difference between it. So it's an extra 20,000. It's essentially for that one. It's a one-time wastewater budget for doing the engineering. So as soon as that's gone, you should get back to normalize. We wouldn't budget for it, which would lower any of the effective surplus. So carrying forward, because there's very little reserves and everything. So no, there'd be no way to reduce that fee increase from the level that we set it.
Okay, so the fee or the increase in the annual operating cost was set to be able to just run the system next year.
Yeah, that's correct.
It didn't have massive reserves and that sort of thing. So
Yeah, with the entire fee increases and everything else, that should generate us about 185,000 in user fee revenue. So going forward, if you have a $185,000 budget, and then you'd be exactly matching.
matching the expense needed.
Yeah, that's correct. So for next year, we're actually going to go down a little bit as far as engineering is in the wastewater, but then you're going to have some increased debt payments and everything else. But you should be set for next year after that rate increase we just did.
That's if I get through this year.
Yes. Yeah, I mean there still could be repairs or anything else, but so far everything's been operating within parameters.
Yeah, you just need to know that it's pretty brutal out there right now.
Yeah, we hear that on our end too.
Okay, and I think that was it for me. So there's nothing else from the other directors. All right, sorry to take up so much time.
I have one thing, Director Abram, it's Director Lee. And
Yeah.
it's the same question. I mean, I want to know that our metrics are accurate on Area D water use, because, you know, a lot of people don't believe that water use increased by 8.8%. They won't believe that. And unless we have our municipal metering system in, which was funded like 2 years ago in our budget, fully funded, but we need to know that that number is accurate. How do we know it's accurate if you're using the rusty old meters that Campbell River has had in for the past 50 years? How do we know that number's accurate?
The 8.8% is actually a financial calculation. So if we look at the total usage and everything off the bills, it's up 8.8%. Yeah, if the city of Campbell River made mistakes or anything else, it would be hard to detect on our end.
So Area D did fund more than $500,000 to install universal metering, municipal metering at the entry, and plus backflow valves, so that we knew exactly how much water we're using, so that bills could be based on something real, and
Well,
rather than
Director,
projections.
Mr. Chair,
We don't have that, and I don't understand why not. It's been a couple of years and we don't have that yet.
well, Mr. Chair, I'll add that the design of the water metering locations is been complete. We're tendering out that construction work shortly, and and then begin building on that. I think to characterize that we don't know that the metering from Campbell River is accurate is it's unsubstantiated. That staff have no evidence that it isn't accurate. So.
Well, just from what I
Okay.
see around, I don't believe it. So, you
Yeah.
know, it gives a lot of people discomfort.
Brenda, maybe that's a conversation for another forum with Campbell River staff or whatever.
It's our staff
Anyway,
that
can we
needs
move
to
on?
use the meters.
Okay, well, remember that this is basically just financial report surpluses. So we don't have to get into the total details. Okay. So did we vote on that yet, Tom?
No, you have not.
Great. It was moved and seconded. Gerald and Brenda?
Alternate.
Maybe it was Cora? Okay. I'm sorry, I have a hard time keeping up with the agenda page, my active agenda page, the Teams page, and the meeting chat script. So you know, it's to be three places at once, and you guys type a lot faster than I can look around or whatever. So forgive me for not following procedure, Tom. I will try and be a better boy. Okay, we are moving on to item 3, request for financial assistance, Ocean Grove Parent Advisory Council.
Move receipt.
Second, Gerald.
Lee, Gerald, discussion on the CAO report.
Nothing, Dad, Mr. Chair.
Okay, no opposition, all approved. Thank you. Item B.
Move the recommendation.
Second, Gerald.
Okay, Brenda, Gerald. Any discussion on that? All those sorry, any opposed? Carried. Bylaws. Item J, number 1, bylaw number 411, public hearing remuneration. Report from the CAO be received.
Move receipt, Gerald.
Second, Lee.
Well, Mr. Chair, if I can just make a comment here. So this is staff following up with direction from the electoral area directors to address the public hearing issues in terms of remuneration on a public hearing matter that would include an OCP and a rezoning amendment, I believe, at the same public hearing.
Okay, thank you very much. So on receipt, anyone opposed? Seeing none, that's carried. And item B, committee recommend.
Second.
Readings. Okay, Wally, Lee. Discussion. Anyone opposed? Carried. Bylaws 4, 12, and 13, OCP and rezoning for Alliance. This is in area C. I would move the CAO report.
Second, Gerald.
Second.
Okay, that was Lori, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay, moved and seconded on the CAO's report. Anything, Dave?
Nothing, Dad, Mr. Chair.
Okay, anyone opposed? Carried. Item A, or sorry, item B.
Move B, Gerald.
Second.
Second, Lee. Anyone opposed? Carried. Item C.
Move C, Gerald.
Second, Lee.
Okay. Any discussion? Anyone opposed? Carried. Item D,
Move D, Gerald.
Second.
Second, Val.
okay. And anyone opposed? Carried. So that will be forwarded to the board. Okay, we're on to item 3, bylaw 415, Sayward Valley Recreation Community Use Service.
Move receipt, Gerald.
Second.
Okay, any discussion?
Mr. Chair, just as this is just a bylaw to have the misleading term recreation changed from that bylaw, that function, if I will.
Okay. Any objection?
Wasn't it to change Sayward Valley Recreation and Community Youth Service to Heritage Hall?
Service.
Wasn't it to refer to the Heritage Hall service?
Well, it
Mr.
does.
Chair, if I may, that was my understanding was a simple name change, and the bylaw, I'll just quickly open it here, unless I don't have access to copy otherwise. So what this is proposing is to change the name of the service to the Sayward Valley Heritage Hall Service Area.
That's fine.
Okay, so Brenda, you're right, but what is listed before you is also right. That's what it was called. Hayward Valley Recreation Community Youth Service,
Yeah, and we're
being
changing it.
changing it to the Heritage. Okay, anything else on that? On receipt, anyone opposed? Carried. Item B,
Move that the committee recommend that bylaw 415 be given 3 readings and adopted by the board.
Second.
okay. Any discussion? Anyone opposed? Carried. I don't have any of the rest of the things on there except for a termination motion.
Move termination.
Second.
Moved and seconded 4 times. We're good. Thank you very much, everybody, for your patience. And thank you, staff, for your reports. Onward and upward. We'll see you in a little while.